Tony Bennett stared at the computer screen in Chase Manhattan Bank in complete disbelief as the teller's words echoed in his mind like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett, but according to our records, someone has been using your identity to open multiple accounts across the city. The Social Security Administration has flagged your name for fraudulent activity." The 97-year-old singer felt his legs grow weak as he gripped the marble counter for support. In all his decades of fame, he had never imagined that someone would steal his identity. Not just his credit cards or bank information, but his actual name, his reputation, his very essence as an artist. "What kind of accounts?" Tony asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The young teller, who clearly didn't recognize the legendary performer standing before her, scrolled through her computer with growing concern. Performance contracts, recording studio rentals, music publishing agreements. Someone calling himself Tony Bennett has been signing deals all over Manhattan, and the payments are being deposited into accounts that aren't yours. Ama asıl şok edici olan şey, teller'ın bir sonraki açıklamasıydı. "Sir, I hate to tell you this, but whoever is using your identity has been quite active. Just last week, they signed a contract for a performance at Lincoln Center. The deposit alone was $50,000. Tony felt the world spinning around him. Someone wasn't just stealing his money. They were stealing his career, his reputation, performing under his name at venues where he had built his legacy over 7 decades. "I need to see everything," Tony said, his voice gaining strength as anger replaced shock. "Every account, every contract, every transaction." The teller printed out page after page of documents that revealed the scope of the identity theft. The imposter had been operating for at least 6 months, booking performances at prestigious venues, signing recording contracts with independent labels, and even scheduling television appearances, all using Tony Bennett's name and reputation. İşte tam bu noktada her şey değişti. As Tony studied the paperwork, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The signature on the contracts wasn't just similar to his, it was perfect. Whoever was doing this had studied Tony's handwriting so carefully that even he couldn't tell the difference between his real signature and the forgeries. "This is impossible," Tony murmured, staring at a contract dated just 3 days ago. "No one knows my signature this well except—" He trailed off as a horrifying possibility occurred to him. There were only a handful of people who had access to enough samples of his signature to forge it this perfectly. His family members, his closest business associates, and his longtime personal assistant who handled his correspondence. "Henüz en büyük sürprizi görmedin." Tony's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Bennett, we need to talk. Meet me at Café Luxembourg on 70th Street at 3 p.m. today. Come alone. I know who's been stealing your identity, and you're not going to believe the reason why." Tony stared at the message, his hands shaking. Someone out there knew about the identity theft, knew he had discovered it, and was watching him closely enough to contact him within hours of his visit to the bank. Against his better judgment, Tony decided to go to the meeting. At 97, he had survived World War II, the ups and downs of show business, and countless personal challenges. He wasn't about to be intimidated by some anonymous text message, no matter how unsettling it might be. Café Luxembourg was crowded with the usual Upper West Side lunch crowd when Tony arrived at exactly 3 p.m. He looked around nervously, unsure who he was supposed to meet, when a woman in her 50s approached his table. "Mr. Bennett, I'm Detective Sarah Martinez, NYPD Identity Theft Unit. I'm the one who texted you." Tony felt simultaneously relieved and concerned. "Detective, how did you know I was at the bank today?" "We've been investigating your case for 3 weeks," she said, sitting down across from him. The person stealing your identity has been sloppy lately, leaving digital footprints that led us straight to them. But what we discovered about their motives is going to shock you. Dur bir dakika, bu datayı kaçırma. Detective Martinez pulled out a thick folder and opened it to reveal surveillance photographs, bank records, and what appeared to be concert footage from various venues around New York City. Mr. Bennett, the person stealing your identity isn't just some random criminal looking to make money off your name. They're someone who's been obsessed with you for decades, someone who genuinely believes they are you. Tony studied the surveillance photos and felt his heart stop. The images showed a man in his 70s performing on stage at small venues around the city, wearing the same style of suit Tony favored, holding a microphone in the same manner, even moving with similar gestures and posture. "My God," Tony whispered, "he looks just like me." "Not just looks like you," Detective Martinez corrected. "According to our investigation, this man has spent years studying your performances, your mannerisms, your speech patterns. He's undergone plastic surgery to enhance the resemblance, and he's trained his voice to match yours as closely as possible." "Şimdi gördüklerin hiçbir şey." The detective showed Tony a video on her tablet. Security camera footage from a performance 3 nights ago at a small jazz club in Greenwich Village. Tony watched in horrified fascination as his doppelganger performed "I Left My Heart in San Francisco," with such accuracy that even Tony had to admit the man was remarkably talented. "His name is Robert Torrino," Detective Martinez continued. "He's 73 years old, a former lounge singer who never made it big. About 5 years ago, he apparently became convinced that he was meant to be Tony Bennett, that somehow fate had made a mistake and given you the career that was rightfully his. Tony felt sick, so he decided to just take over my life? It's more complicated than that. Torrino genuinely believes that he is Tony Bennett. Our psychological evaluation suggests he's suffering from a rare form of delusional disorder, where he's convinced that you are an imposter who stole his identity years ago. İnanmayacaksın ama the situation was about to get even more bizarre. "Mr. Bennett, there's something else you need to know. Torrino isn't just performing at small venues. He's scheduled to appear on The Tonight Show next week, supposedly for an interview about your comeback after your brief retirement. The show's producers think they're booking the real Tony Bennett." Tony felt as if he was living in some surreal nightmare. "How is that possible? Don't they know what I look like?" Torrino's team, and yes, he has a team of people helping him, told the producers that you've had some recent health issues and that your appearance has changed slightly. They provided medical documentation that appears to be legitimate, explaining that you've been out of the public eye for medical reasons but are now ready to return to performing. The detective showed Tony copies of the forged medical records, complete with letterheads from prestigious hospitals and signatures from doctors who didn't exist. "This is unbelievable," Tony said. "How long has this been going on?" "We think the performance aspect started about 6 months ago, but Torrino has been studying you and preparing for this for at least 5 years. He's incredibly thorough. He knows your personal history, your family details, your career milestones. In some ways, he knows more about your life than most people who actually know you." "Ama hikayenin asıl dramı henüz başlıyordu." Detective Martinez leaned forward with a grave expression. "Mr. Bennett, we have reason to believe that Torrino is planning something much bigger than just stealing your identity for performances. We found documents in his apartment suggesting that he's trying to legally claim ownership of your entire estate, your recordings, your royalties, your personal property." Tony's hands began to shake. How could he possibly do that? He's been working with a team of corrupt lawyers who specialize in elder fraud. The plan appears to be to have you declared mentally incompetent due to your advanced age. Then have Torrino step in as your true identity to take control of your assets. The detective showed Tony legal documents that made his blood run cold. Torrino had filed papers claiming that the real Tony Bennett had died 3 years ago, and that he, Robert Torrino, was the rightful heir to the Tony Bennett legacy, because he had been performing under that name longer than the imposter who had been claiming to be Tony Bennett. "This is insane," Tony said. "How could any court believe something so ridiculous?" That's what we thought, until we saw how much evidence Torrino has assembled. He has photographs, documents, witness statements, all fabricated but very convincing. He's even found people who are willing to testify that they've known him as Tony Bennett for decades. İşte tam bu noktada Tony Bennett tarihi bir karar verdi. "Detective Martinez, I want to confront this man myself." "Sir, I strongly advise against that. Torrino is clearly unstable, and we don't know how he might react to meeting the real Tony Bennett." "But that's exactly why I need to meet him," Tony insisted. "You said he genuinely believes he's me, right? If that's true, then maybe I can reach him, make him understand the truth about what he's doing." The detective shook her head. "Mr. Bennett, people with this kind of delusional disorder don't respond well to reality checks. Confronting him with the truth about his identity could cause a complete psychological breakdown." "Or," Tony said, "it could cure him. Detective, I've spent my entire career connecting with people through music and conversation. If this man is as obsessed with me as you say, then maybe I'm the only person who can get through to him." Against the detective's strong objections, Tony convinced her to arrange a controlled meeting with Robert Torrino. The plan was to have Tony attend one of Torrino's performances, then approach him backstage under police supervision. 2 nights later, Tony found himself sitting in the back of Murphy's Jazz Club in the Village, wearing dark glasses and a baseball cap, watching Robert Torrino perform his songs with eerie accuracy. Şimdi başlar gerçek drama. As Tony watched his doppelganger perform, he felt a strange mixture of revulsion and admiration. Torrino was undeniably talented, and his interpretation of Tony's songs was remarkably faithful to the originals. But there was something deeply unsettling about watching someone else inhabit his identity so completely. During the intermission, Detective Martinez gave Tony the signal. They made their way backstage, where Torrino was changing clothes in a small dressing room that was decorated with Tony Bennett memorabilia. Album covers, concert posters, and photographs that chronicled a career that wasn't his. When Tony entered the dressing room, Torrino looked up from adjusting his tie and froze. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other in silence, the real Tony Bennett, face to face with his obsessed imitator. "You," Torrino whispered, his face going pale. "You're the one who's been pretending to be me." Tony felt his heart racing, but he forced himself to speak calmly. "Robert, my name is Tony Bennett. I think there's been some confusion about who we are." Torrino's expression shifted from shock to rage. "No, you're the imposter. I've been Tony Bennett my whole life. You stole my name, my career, my songs." "Robert, I recorded I Left My Heart in San Francisco in 1962. I performed at Carnegie Hall in 1962. I've been making music under the name Tony Bennett since the 1950s. "Lies!" Torrino shouted, backing against the wall. "Those are my memories, my career. You've been living my life." Detective Martinez moved closer, ready to intervene if the situation escalated, but Tony raised his hand to signal her to wait. "Robert," Tony said gently, "tell me about your childhood. Where did you grow up?" Torrino's face became confused. I grew up in Queens, Astoria. My father was a grocer, my mother was a seamstress." Those are my memories, Robert. My childhood, my parents. What were your parents' names? For a moment, Torrino looked lost. They were... My father was... He trailed off, unable to answer. İşte o anda Robert Torrino'nun kafası karıştı. Tony could see the confusion and fear in Torrino's eyes as the man struggled to separate his real memories from the Tony Bennett biography he had memorized and internalized. Robert, what's your real last name? Torrino, he whispered, then looked shocked that he had answered. And what did you do before you started performing as Tony Bennett? I sang in lounges, wedding receptions, bar mitzvahs. Torrino's voice became smaller, more vulnerable, but I never made it. I was never good enough. Tony felt a wave of compassion for this troubled man. Robert, you're very talented. Your voice, your performance tonight, it was beautiful. But it was your talent, not mine. Torrino began to cry. But if I'm not Tony Bennett, then who am I? I've been him for so long, I don't remember how to be anyone else. This was the moment Detective Martinez had warned Tony about. The potential psychological breakdown that could occur when someone with delusional disorder is confronted with reality. But instead of breaking down completely, Torrino seemed to be having moments of clarity mixed with confusion. Robert, Tony said gently, would you like to know what I think happened to you? Torrino nodded, tears streaming down his face. I think you're a gifted musician who never got the recognition you deserved. I think you started out admiring my work, then gradually began to identify with it so strongly that you lost track of where Tony Bennett ended and Robert Torrino began. But I've been you for years. I know everything about your life, your music, your family. You know everything about my public life, Tony corrected. But there are things about being Tony Bennett that you'll never know, because you've never lived them. You've never felt the nervousness I felt before my first recording session, or the pride I felt when my children were born, or the grief I experienced when I lost people I loved. Daha bitmedi. Torrino looked at Tony with something approaching lucidity. So you're saying I'm not crazy? I'm just lost? I'm saying you're a talented man who got so caught up in admiring someone else's life that you forgot to live your own. Detective Martinez stepped forward. Mr. Torrino, we're prepared to offer you a deal. If you agree to get psychological help and make restitution for the money you've taken using Mr. Bennett's identity, we won't press criminal charges. But Tony surprised everyone by making a different offer. Robert, I have a better idea. How would you like to perform with me? Both Detective Martinez and Torrino stared at Tony in shock. What do you mean? Torrino asked. I mean a legitimate performance. You as Robert Torrino, me as Tony Bennett. We could do a concert together. 2 generations of jazz singers sharing the stage. You could finally perform as yourself, with your own identity, and still be connected to the music you love. Torrino looked confused but intrigued. You would do that after everything I've done. Robert, you've spent years studying my music, my style, my approach to performance. In a way, you're like a student who's been preparing for years to work with his teacher. The problem is that you've been trying to replace the teacher instead of learning from him. İnanmayacaksın ama, this offer would change both their lives. 3 months later, Tony Bennett and Robert Torrino performed together at a small venue in Greenwich Village, billed as 2 voices, 1 love of music. Torrino performed as himself for the first time in years, singing some of Tony's classic songs, as well as original material he had written, but never had the confidence to perform. The concert was filmed and later released as a documentary called Identity and Music, a story of obsession and redemption. It became a powerful exploration of what happens when admiration becomes identity theft, and how two people can find healing through honest, artistic collaboration. Torrino continued to receive psychological counseling, gradually rebuilding his sense of self as Robert Torrino rather than as a fake Tony Bennett. He discovered that his own voice and musical instincts were actually quite distinctive and valuable, something he had never allowed himself to believe. The ironic thing, Torrino said in an interview 6 months later, is that I spent so many years trying to be Tony Bennett that I never gave myself a chance to discover who Robert Torrino could be as a musician. Working with Tony taught me that the goal isn't to become someone else, it's to become the best version of yourself. Tony, meanwhile, learned something profound about the responsibility that comes with being a public figure whose work inspires others. Robert's situation taught me that when people connect deeply with your music, it's not just entertainment for them, it can become part of their identity, Tony reflected. As artists, we have a responsibility to understand the power our work has in other people's lives, and to use that power wisely. The stolen identity case became a landmark in understanding the psychology of celebrity obsession and identity fraud. But for Tony Bennett, it became something more personal. A reminder that behind every fan, even the most troubling ones, is a human being looking for connection, meaning, and the courage to be themselves. Detective Martinez later commented that the Tony Bennett identity theft case was unlike any she had handled in her career. Most identity theft is purely financial. Criminals steal someone's information to make money, but Robert Torrino's case was about something much deeper. He wasn't just stealing Tony Bennett's identity for profit, he was stealing it because he had lost his own sense of who he was supposed to be. The final resolution came when Torrino legally changed his stage name to Bobby Romano and began performing jazz standards as himself, often including Tony Bennett songs in his repertoire as tribute pieces rather than attempts at impersonation. "I still love Tony's music," Torrino, now Romano, said. "The difference is that now I love it as Bobby Romano, not as someone pretending to be Tony Bennett, and that makes all the difference in the world." Tony continued to mentor Bobby Romano informally, occasionally calling him to offer advice about performances or simply to check on his psychological well-being. Their relationship evolved from victim and criminal to something more like teacher and student, proving that even the most troubling situations can sometimes lead to unexpected friendships. The stolen identity case taught Tony Bennett that his legacy wasn't just about the music he had recorded or the concerts he had performed. It was about the impact his work had on other people's lives and his responsibility to help them find healthy ways to channel their admiration into their own creative expressions. "In the end," Tony said, "Robert didn't really want to steal my identity. He wanted to find his own identity, but he had gotten so lost that he thought becoming me was the only way to become someone worth being." The real crime wasn't the identity theft, it was that he had never been encouraged to believe that Robert Torrino was worth being. But the stolen identity case had one more shocking twist. Tony received an anonymous USB drive containing a phone conversation between Robert Torrino and an unidentified woman. "Robert, your real father was Anthony Dominic Benedetto," the woman's voice said. "Your mother Anna had an affair with Tony Bennett in 1950. You're Tony Bennett's son." Tony felt the room spinning. Could Robert be his biological son? Detective Martinez returned with DNA test results. "Mr. Bennett, the test is conclusive. Robert Torrino is your biological son." Tony felt stunned. At 97, he had discovered a 73-year-old son he never knew existed. A son who had stolen his identity believing it was his birthright. "This changes everything," Tony said. Robert wasn't just delusional, he was a son trying to connect with a father who didn't know he existed. The reunion took place in a therapy center. Both men looked nervous as they faced each other. "Robert, I had no idea your mother was pregnant. If I had known about you, I would have been part of your life," Tony said. Robert's eyes filled with tears. "I spent my whole life wondering why my father never seemed to love me. When I found out my real father was this famous singer who had everything I wanted, I guess I went crazy." "You weren't crazy. You were hurt and looking for connection. But stealing my identity wasn't the way. When I started performing your songs, it felt like I was finally connecting with you. It seemed like fate was telling me I was meant to be Tony Bennett." Tony reached across the table. "Robert, you were meant to be Tony Bennett's son. That's different from being Tony Bennett yourself." Over the following months, they began building a father-son relationship that should have started decades earlier. The case took another turn when two other women came forward with similar claims. DNA tests revealed Tony had two more children he'd never known about: Marie Castellano, 68, and Vincent Romano, 65. "You've gone from identity theft victim to discovering 3 adult children," Detective Martinez observed. "It's humbling and overwhelming, but also healing," Tony replied. "My impact on other people's lives was broader than I ever imagined." 2 years later, Tony performed at Carnegie Hall with all 3 newly discovered children. Bobby Romano sang backup, Marie conducted a youth choir, and Vincent played saxophone. The concert was titled Family Harmony, Music Across Generations. "Tonight, I'm not just performing as Tony Bennett," Tony told the audience. "I'm performing as Anthony Dominic Benedetto, a father given the unexpected gift of knowing his children." The stolen identity case had taught Tony that identity theft isn't always about money or fame. Sometimes it's about a desperate search for belonging and connection that takes the wrong path but leads to the right destination. 3 months after the Carnegie Hall concert, Tony received a letter from a young woman named Lisa Romano, Bobby's daughter, making her Tony's granddaughter. "Dear grandfather," the letter began, "I wanted you to know that watching my father find his way back to himself and to you has been the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. For years I was ashamed of Dad's obsession with you, but now I understand he wasn't obsessed with Tony Bennett. He was searching for his father." The letter continued. "Dad has started teaching music again, this time as himself. He's working with kids who feel lost or different, showing them that it's possible to find your identity even when you think you've lost it completely. He says you taught him that the goal isn't to become someone else. It's to become the best version of yourself." Lisa's letter included an invitation to her wedding where she asked if Tony would walk her down the aisle since Bobby wasn't emotionally ready for such a public role yet. "It would mean everything to our family," she wrote, "to have you there not as Tony Bennett, the celebrity, but as Anthony Benedetto, our grandfather." The wedding took place 6 months later in a small church in Queens, not far from where Tony had grown up. As he walked Lisa down the aisle, Tony felt overwhelmed by the realization that his stolen identity case had led not just to finding his children, but to becoming part of a whole, extended family he had never known existed. Bobby Romano performed at the wedding reception singing "The Way You Look Tonight," not as Tony Bennett would have sung it, but as Bobby Romano, with his own style and interpretation. Tony watched with pride as his son finally performed as himself, confident in his own identity. "You know," Bobby said to Tony during the reception, "I spent so many years trying to be you that I never realized we were already connected. All that time I was stealing your identity, What I really needed was just to be your son. Detective Martinez attended the wedding as well, having become something of a family friend during the long investigation and resolution of the case. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "in 15 years of investigating identity theft, I've never seen a case end with a wedding celebration. Usually these stories end with prison sentences and destroyed relationships." "This case taught me," Tony replied, "that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who need our help the most. Bobby didn't steal my identity because he wanted to harm me. He stole it because he was trying to find a way to love me." The stolen identity case became a teaching tool for law enforcement agencies, showing how understanding the psychological motivations behind crimes can lead to healing rather than just punishment. Bobby Romano continued to perform as himself, eventually opening a small music school where he taught young people about finding their own voices rather than trying to imitate their heroes. "My father taught me," Bobby said in interviews, "that the highest form of tribute to someone you admire isn't to become them, but to let them inspire you to become fully yourself." Tony Bennett's final reflection on the stolen identity case came in his autobiography, published 2 years later. "I thought someone had stolen my identity, but what really happened was that I discovered parts of my identity I never knew existed. I learned that being Tony Bennett wasn't just about the music I made, but about the family I created, even when I didn't know I was creating it. The real identity theft would have been if I had let fear and anger prevent me from embracing the son who was trying so desperately to find his way home to me."